Alright, so Calabash made another video calling me out in which he claims that a recovery speed lower than 4 is totally unusable or useless, or that nobody uses it. Normally I would invite everyone to first start by watching his video, but he has since deleted the video for reasons I don't know. Fortunately, I saved the video because I guess I just knew that was going to happen.
My buddy sent me a link to a video that Lauren Lemecki posted, and it was a critique of my Equinox 800 video. So, why was the Equinox on a recovery of 4? Was it because old Calabash was trying to flaw the test and make the mighty Knox look bad? Is that what it was, folks? Is that what's going on here? You boys need to really get some schooling. You guys are smart, and I tell y'all got high IQs. But you guys need to get some schooling on it.
Calabash is right. Let's start with some education. Let's start with the question, what is recovery speed? Well, you can think of recovery speed as the refresh rate of the detector, or the polling interval. Each interval, the detector is taking a snapshot of what is in the ground. If you raise that value, it takes a narrower snapshot and therefore increases the separation qualities of the detector, which is basically its ability to tell one object from another when they're closely positioned. But it comes at a cost of depth. If you lower the recovery speed, you get more depth but with less target separation. On the Equinox 800, the recovery speed setting ranges from a 1 to an 8. On the XP Deus II, the equivalent setting, or reactivity, which is recovery speed, ranges from a 0 to a 5. These are unitless measurements, so it's hard to say which setting on the Equinox is equivalent to which setting on the Deus II. But the physics of the situation create an upper and a lower bound upon these settings. Basically, you can't take a smaller snapshot than the coil is wide, for example. But that's also why you can increase the coil size to get more depth, but it comes at a cost of separation. Or you can choose a smaller coil to get better separation, but at the cost of depth. Ultimately, you want to choose the recovery speed that maximizes depth, but without compromising target separation. The higher target density environment you are in, the more you want to set it towards separation. If you are in a mostly empty environment, you want to set it more for depth, because separation doesn't matter. So in his depth test video, he has a recovery speed on the Equinox at a 4 out of 8, and the recovery speed of the XP Deus II at a 0.5. Do I even need to say what is wrong with this picture when we were talking about comparing the maximum depth on the two detectors? The settings speak for themselves. One is simply not set for maximum depth.
I don't play that game of jacking one detector up over the other one to make the other one look bad. I don't play games.
So you might be wondering, why is the Equinox set at a 4 and the XP Deus is set so much lower? Well, here's his reason.
If you run the Knox below a 4, it starts smearing the signals and smearing the audio response on those targets. If you run it at 3 or 2, it starts smearing out the tones and it becomes basically unusable.
Calabash is correct. The tones will smear. But if you're matching the setting to the environment, that won't be an issue. Should you use a recovery speed of 1 in a park loaded with trash? Hell no. That would be using the setting incorrectly. If you set it incorrectly, it will be unusable. You can see that it does smear the targets together. There's still an audio indication that there's possibly 2 targets there, but if you add more targets into the mix, it does muddy the water. But spoiler alert, it happens on the Deus II as well. It's not an Equinox versus Deus thing. It's a limitation of physics. There's no way around that. And quite frankly, if you ask my opinion, the Equinox, in this particular test, the Equinox is giving a better indication of multiple targets than the XP Deus II is. So right off the bat, his reasoning that the Equinox is too smeary is invalid, unless you want to assert that the Deus II is also too smeary. I mean, if you're in an environment where the targets have lots of space between them, what does it matter if the tones smear? You see how close those 2 targets are. So his assertion that the Equinox is totally unusable at that setting because it smears targets together is total nonsense. They both smear targets together because it's a limitation of physics. It's not an Equinox or a Deus thing.
You should know better than why it can't be run under 4, reliably. Tell me who hunts with a recovery speed of 2 on the Equinox? Who?
Well, for starters, I do. But let's talk about some real-world detecting situations in which I do use a recovery speed of a 1 or a 2. Scenario 1, you're at a mostly empty beach in the dry sand and you're swinging your detector and you're just simply not getting lots of signals. There's very few targets and they're spread out. Well, if you crank the recovery speed down to a 1 to get some extra depth, it doesn't matter if the tone smears if there's distance between the targets. You're just trying to get the detector to grab a hold of something. If you do this, you might find that there's some deeper targets down there that the calabashes of the world walked right over because they don't venture below a 4. Scenario number 2, you're wandering through the forest in an area that's just empty and you're not finding very many targets because there hasn't been a lot of recent human activity. Well, crank that recovery speed down to a 1 and start looking for a deep Viking sword or maybe even a Bronze Age spear tip or some other larger, deeper object or a deep coin. If there isn't an abundance of targets, you don't need to be concerned with one target smearing into another. The smearing simply doesn't matter. Obviously, those specific hunting scenarios don't apply to everyone, but that just goes to show the importance of thinking beyond your own bubble of experience. It may be the case that for Calabash's environment that below a 4 is useless, but it would be foolish to assume that's true for every environment, every detecting scenario, and every detectorist. I'm sure there's more scenarios out there that I simply can't fathom because I haven't personally come across them where a low recovery speed like that is also useful. So in summary, is a recovery speed below a 4 totally unusable and totally useless on the Equinox? No, I just gave you 2 real-world scenarios that I hunt in which I cranked a recovery speed down to a 1 or a 2. I encourage everyone to venture outside of their comfort zone and question the limitations that you might have imposed upon yourself, or a limitation that maybe some YouTuber has convinced you of. You might be able to acquire a new skill that you can add to your detecting repertoire that enables you to find something amazing.